Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the 8th episode of My Adventures in Roleplaying. Today's topic is games that I either have played and would like to have played more of, or games that I've never had the chance to play at all. I have been, as I said before, role-playing since 1981, and I've predominantly played Dragons across the various versions, except version 4 that never existed. And I've played a smattering of other games, but I've never really gotten deep or as deep as I would like to in many games. So we're going to go through some of those today. So the first game that I'll bring up is a game that I got into when it came out in the early 80s, Top Secret. Basically the TSR spy game. Trying to emulate the James Bond action-adventure spy movie. They had the original Top Secret, and then they had the second version, Top Secret SI, which was a slicker rule set, but still essentially the same premise. And then most recently, they've had a Kickstarter for Top Secret New Order. All three of these versions were written and or seriously impacted by Merle M. Rasmussen. And it's your typical spy concept, right? So you build a spy character and those kind of things. The good news is the original Top Secret had many modules. So when I was in high school, we played through a bunch of those, being a bunch of teenage jerks, and then a little bit of SI was in there too. And then basically it went away. And if you say to people today, "Oh yeah, Top Secret," they'll say, "Yeah, that was a great game." Not is a great game. It was a great game because it's in the past. It's a historical monument. Even though there's New World Order. So I really would like to play the game, but then again, part of what you need to play a game is a group of people to play it with, somebody to run it, and something to run. And I'll get into those topics a little bit later when I go over this as a whole. But I really like the spy game. I like the spy genre. I like the concept of intrigue and adventure and disguise and Mission Impossible and Born Identity and Bond, if we don't include the Pierce Brosnan Bonds, because those I'm sorry, Pierce, you got a raw deal, because those were good, but no, they were silly is what they were. So Top Secret's one of those things. Now when they had the D20 Open Gaming License for D&D, they did create a D20 Modern game, and that D20 Modern game had various products that were made that used the same premise, with one of those games being Spycraft. So I own the Spycraft game because I couldn't get Top Secret at the time. So I thought, oh, okay, Spycraft is my gateway. But then again, the book sits on my shelf and it doesn't get used. It's kind of dusty. On the D20 Modern, the interesting concept about D20 Modern is that when they created it, rather than creating classes, fighter, rogue, thief, whatever, they created concepts. So you had strong character, which was built around strength. You had the tough character that was built around constitution. You had the smart character that was built around intelligence. You had the face that was built around, they were called the charismatic, but charisma character. So it was interesting because your levels were dependent upon you taking a class level in something based upon an attribute rather than based upon a specific sort of class in the truest sense of the word. And it was also neat because I think it was the original of talents, which became a really good element in the Star Wars role-playing game. And to a certain extent, I never got into Modern as much as I would have liked to. But, so that's my spy world. I definitely would like to get into the spy games more and more. Now, if we take a small offshoot from D20 Modern, we can go to Urban Arcana, which was a sort of a campaign book for D20 Modern, and the only reason I'm mentioning this is because this was at one point I was trying to create a D20 version of Shadowrun, because if there's anything about Shadowrun that's kludgy, It's the dice mechanic is a little bit off the rails. Rolling 33 dice, for a test is like, what? But it's the way the game's built. So that's, of course, where I'm going to is Shadowrun. I bought Shadowrun when it first came out in first edition. I love the game. I played it for a while in university. I went away from role-playing for a while. There was a big sale, I think, from FanPro in the... it must have been the early 2000s, and I bought like a collection, like every book you could possibly need to run Shadowrun 3rd edition, which is the last version of Shadowrun that I really liked. Version 4, they changed the character creation mechanic into a point-buy system, which I wasn't too keen on, and they also introduced around that same time the wireless world, which I'm not... I don't see the necessity for that. I like the old idea of plugging in with a fiber optic cable in your brain. And the worst thing of all being the Technomancer, the mage for the internet, or Matrix as it's called in Shadowrun. Unlike a Decker who needs a physical piece of hardware to interact with the Matrix, the Technomancer doesn't. I don't really know why they created them. They're kind of preposterous in my idea, so I try not to play with them. So really, the version of Shadowrun I'd like to get into is 3rd edition, and use that rule set and go forward. Of course, now there's 6th edition is the most current edition of Shadowrun. But why do I like Shadowrun? Because it's an incredibly rich world. It's very well developed. It's very, very thought. They did a lot of thinking when it came to what worked and what didn't work, other than those aspects I mentioned. So it's one of the few games where I can read just a book of Shadowrun and just enjoy it for the sake of reading it and not playing it, which is part of the reason why I own a lot of the materials, because it just has such a rich depth to it that is just really, really well thought out. So Shadowrun is one of those games that I wish I could get back into. It's a matter of just, again, the right circumstance. Now, another game that I did play a little bit of most recently with my coworkers, and it didn't, or not coworkers, my fellow gamers. We didn't get that far with it, was Mutants and Masterminds. And we discovered, or I discovered a little bit late, the game is written more to be a game of combat than to be a game necessarily of storytelling. It has a very, very interesting combat system, and a lot of people complain that with 3rd edition D&D, the biggest problem is that it takes forever to get through a battle because of all the options and variables and all those things. It's not very quick in that sense. Well, Mutants and Masterminds can be a little bit more drawn out, but that's because that's the focus it was trying to go for. Apparently it was trying to go for a 4-colored combat, comics where, half the comic book is 2 guys beating the crap out of each other, and then the beginning and the end are basically just to get to the next comic where you get into combat. So I was trying to play the campaign that exists for Emerald City for Mutants and Masterminds. I was running it, and I just had a hard time wrapping my head around it because there's no real teeth to it. It's like it's well developed in terms of the combat and the combat effectiveness, but in terms of why people are doing stuff and all that wasn't there, and I just didn't buy into it, and I didn't realize at the time the focus of the game. And that goes to another aspect. You need to know both the concept of the game was written for, as well as the audience that is playing the game, and make certain that there's a mesh there. And if there isn't a mesh there, then obviously it's not going to work. And then as for the last game, it's a world really, that I did play some of, but nowhere near as much as I would have liked to, and I think I missed out a lot, is the World of Darkness. Vampire the Masquerade, Werewolf the Apocalypse, Changeling the Lost, Wraith the Oblivion, etc., etc., etc. I remember walking into a gaming store in 1990 or 91, and there was a pamphlet. It was an 8-page pamphlet that was in glossy paper, and it basically was the advertisement for Vampire. And I was hooked, like right away. It's great. It looks so deep, and it's so fascinating to play a vampire. And of course, this was, around the same time that I I had read an interview with a vampire and the vampire Lestat, and I really like horror and those kind of things. So I thought, oh, this is neat. And the one line that always caught me with the game was, the beast you are, you're less the beast you become. Because you are essentially a blood-sucking vampire. You're not human. You're a creature of the night with great superpowers. And you have to balance that with your hunger, the fact that you're constantly driven to drain the life of others. It was a really, really cool concept and a really, really good game. I played a little bit when I first got it, but that was around the time that I finished up college, and then where I went, that game wasn't on anyone's radar, really. As I said, most of my circles have involved Dungeons and Dragons or small variants thereof. And I miss the whole scene, the whole LARPing scene and all those things. I don't know if I could do LARPing, but it's fascinating in and of itself. I most recently got the Vampire the 5th edition. I bought into the rule set because I was playing on an online Discord game. I found that the storytelling in that game was very, very insular. Everyone was basically sort of telling their own story and not telling a cooperative story. And that was one of the reasons I got into the World of Darkness originally. Is it was originally described as a storytelling game. The dice rolling and combat are the least of your interests. What's fascinating is telling a cooperative story around these creatures who exist, to leech off the world in whatever way that they do. And so that's really what drew me into the game. That's still what keeps me interested. I've been following the game on, all these years. I just haven't been playing it. I played a couple of computer games but I've never really gotten into a real group for various reasons. So that pretty much wraps up the games that I have played that I wish I would have played more of. So now we're going to go through the games that I haven't had a chance to play that I'm very intrigued to try out at this stage in my gaming life. We'll start with the granddaddy of horror games, Call of Cthulhu. I looked at the Call of Cthulhu game when it came out, the box set being the BRP, basic role-playing system, and it intrigued me with the percentile system. But I think if I would have played it when I was playing D&D in the 80s or 80s, I wouldn't have understood the fact that unlike D&D, which is a game of overcoming obstacles and beating the bad guy and ultimately, winning in a sort of way, Call of Cthulhu is none of that. Call of Cthulhu is, here's a fascinating horror tale that you are now in the middle of, and like most horror movies, you will not survive it. The whole premise is you are either slowly going mad from being approached by this onslaught of the Cthulhuoid evil, or you're gonna die. You're gonna get torn apart or whatever. And apparently the enjoyment of the game is solving the mystery or discovering the mystery, not surviving it. And I don't think when I was in my late teens, early 20s, I would have caught that. I would have been the guy with 4 shotguns, a machine gun, and 8 grenades wandering around the mansion trying to blow up, the Shoggoth, rather than realizing I can't, and maybe running away is a good idea. Or just, hoping I can run away and it doesn't kill me in the process. So I really like the idea of Call of Cthulhu because I really like Lovecraftian horror. I really love Lovecraft and the things tangential to Lovecraft, Brian Lumley and Leth and various other people who've written Cthulhuoid concepts. Again, when the D20 Open Gaming License came out, Wizards of the Coast did create, with Monty Cook, the Call of Cthulhu D20 game. And I bought it because I'm like, okay, D20, cool. I can maybe play Call of Cthulhu, and I can play it with a rule set that I better understand, so I won't have that rule set problem. And, of course, it's sitting down there on my shelf. There is a couple of third-party modules and supplements for it that I think I bought a couple of them of. So I have the components I need to play the game. Of course, it's just a matter of playing the game.
And then the other thing that I got fascinated by was Delta Green, which is not so much a game. And there is a game now. They have come up with their own independent game now. But when I bought it, it was a supplement for Call of Cthulhu. So Call of Cthulhu is typically occurring in the Victorian era, Europe and or Eastern Seaboard U.S. Delta Green basically says, no. Let's wind up the clock, bring it up to the modern era. In that case, it was the late 90s, and let's take this from a government conspiracy UFO approach. So there's a special agency within the government that is basically been desanctioned but still exists, called Delta Green, and they investigate things around typically Lovecraft or Cthulhuoid concepts, and try to prevent the world from being destroyed by those that are playing with things that they probably shouldn't. As a result, it's a really cool concept because it takes all the conspiracies, like the UFO conspiracies and various government Majestic 12 documents, and very X-Files in its approach, and as a result, there's a lot of fodder that can be played, because any conspiracy that you want to pull out of pull out of the press, pull out of the modern era, pull out of the almost modern era, you can play with, and so to me it just was a really, really fascinating take on the Cthulhu world. And I went and I bought the Delta Green version that actually has the D20 rule set, so I can actually play it with Cthulhu D20 should I ever get around to playing Cthulhu D20. So it's that's sort of the horror and the modern horror concept. Another FASA game that is really, really, really deep, of course, is Battletech and the Battletech universe. It's got a lot of depth to it, a lot of history to it, a lot of eras in which you can play. And at one point they came up with a concept called Mechwarrior, which is basically role-playing your Battletech game. So typically Battletech is played on a tabletop where you have miniatures, 4, 8, 12, whatever, and you're going head-to-head with somebody else who has a similar amount or power of miniatures, and it's all a tabletop turn-based combat, like tactical game. So what they did was they took the idea of Mechwarrior and said, well, what if we took a pilot and you played that pilot? So instead of it being me playing four mechs against another guy playing 4 mechs, it's me and 3 of my buddies each playing a Mechwarrior, a pilot, and then telling the story in the downtime. So what's happening with these guys when they're not strapped into a mech, shooting off large amounts of ammunition and trying to avoid blowing up? And then they took it and said, okay, well, what if you don't want to be a Mechwarrior? What if you want to be a mechanic, or you want to be an officer, or you want to be somebody else, a spy, or whatever? So it opens up the Battletech universe to a broader range of now role-playing as opposed to just tactical combat play. And as a result, I think it's a really cool concept, because again, it's FASA. Now it's no longer FASA. It's now the TOPS company that has Catalyst Game Labs as a licensee, but it still has all that rich depth. Like again, it's one of those things I can read a book and just be fascinated reading the book without having to necessarily play the game, because of how well developed and well thought out and intelligent it can be. So they updated most recently. They created a new role-playing game for Mechwarrior, because they had a Kickstarter about 1.5 years ago for Coming of the Clans. Basically, they were going to introduce the clan miniatures in the new format, the new plastic that they have. And so they did a Kickstarter, and I went hard in on that Kickstarter to get all of the Inner Sphere mechs that I wanted. Don't care so much about the clans, because I don't like the clans. So because of the renewed interest that existed, there's been some other items that have developed. And one of those items is the book called Destiny, which is the modern version of the Mechwarrior role-playing game, done with a different core mechanic and different set of core rules. But again, it's still basically the idea that you're now playing you're role-playing in that universe as opposed to just tactical combat in that universe. So that's, and then if we take a small tangent, about a year ago, maybe more than a year ago, my son introduced me to what if the Emperor had a text-to-speech device, which is basically a sort of Warhammer 40k parody, sort of not. And I started watching going, what the hell? And I had avoided Warhammer for the longest time because Warhammer is a tabletop war game, but it requires, you got to have the right components, which can be very expensive. You got to use the right paints. You got to paint things the right way. You have to paint everything. I am not a painter. So it never caught my interest. And then the role-playing games that came from it, again, because I wasn't a fan of Warhammer or even aware of what Warhammer really was, I never considered it. So what ends up happening is I get into asking my son, what's this and what's this, because he's really into it. And so I get made aware of the Fantasy Flight Games books, and they lost the license to Warhammer 40k, and when they did, they had a basic blowout sale, and I kind of dipped in and said, okay, sure. So they have 4 core role-playing games. They have Black Crusade, which is basically where you are playing as a member of the those that are corrupted by chaos. So you're kind of playing as the bad guys, kind of. There's Dark Heresy, where you are playing as a member of what's called the Inquisition. So you're out trying to root out the forces of aliens or mutants or heretics that are going to disrupt the world that exists. You have Dark Angels, where you're playing one of the big heavy marine soldiers, space marines, and playing in one of those sort of a little bit more of a heavy unit kind of idea. There's Only War, which is basically when you're playing as one of the mere humans in this world and you know, are very soft and squishy. And then there's Rogue Trader, where you're basically playing on a ship that services or supplies whatever factions you decide to help out. Those might be slight oversimplifications, but those are my understandings. And it all takes place in a grim, dark future where humanity has expanded and is broad across the galaxy, and they're at war constantly with themselves, who, you know, because half of the Imperials basically joined with Chaos and decided that let's, you know, take out the Empire because they're idiots. And then you're also dealing with other forces of Chaos and other aliens and various other things. So it's a very grim, dark future, but it's built around a neo-Gothic architecture and sort of like a heavy religious but not religious influence. So it's as if it has the pomp and circumstance of religion without necessarily the spiritual undervalues. So it's a really fascinating world, and I think role-playing in it could be really fun because it is a grim, dark world. It is just, you know, it adds a different element of science fiction, and I think that would be something that I would definitely want to try out or investigate. And then the last item that I'll bring to attention, there's a great series of novels by Robert Jordan called The Wheel of Time, which makes, it is a contemporary of George R. R. Martin, but in my opinion is better than. Where George R. R. Martin basically has 5 books of around 1,000 pages and tells a the story of kings and Game of Thrones and Clash of Kings and that kind of thing, and tells it with low magic and with grim and gritty politics. The Wheel of Time is a 14-book series, about 800 pages apiece, that tells the arc of an individual who's determined to be the necessary person to prevent the world from falling into utter darkness. And him and the 50 characters around him, and it's an epic saga of people coming to terms with becoming adults, people coming to terms with having certain powers, the politicking thereof. It's a very sweeping book. It's very deep and very rich, and I love the world. And so Wizards of the Coast, when they did their Open Gaming License, another one of the items that they brought out was the Wheel of Time role-playing game. And so it's literally role-playing in the world of the Wheel of Time. And what's really neat about it is that it's just a rich fantasy world with lots of options, and has a different take on magic. Rather than magic being just your typical concept of magic, it's people who are able to manipulate what's called the weave and take various aspects of it and create effects from it. So it's kind of magic, but there's a much more detailed explanation to it, or detailed style to it. And I think it'll be a great world to play in. Unfortunately, there's only one sort of additional book to the role-playing game, which is sort of a super module. It's not a full campaign, but it's not a single module. It's got some depth to it. But other than that, it's one of those things where you'd have to, find the right people and the right game or whatever. So those are the list of the games I really would like to have gotten into or will get into. But here's the kicker, is that, as I was saying, a lot of the stuff that I'm interested in is dark or has dark tones to it. Like Kalakatulu clearly is dark. Delta Green obviously is in there as well. Fantasy Flight Warhammer 40K is definitely on the dark side of things. Shadowrun can kind of be considered dark because you essentially are playing criminals, so there's that idea to it. And World of Darkness is clearly a dark world. And the current gaming group that I've been playing with for, playing at the table with for 17 years, that's not that's not in their world. It's not what they're interested in. We tried World of Darkness for a little bit, didn't pan out, so that went away. And then my online group that I've been playing with for over 30 years, on and off, I might get them to get into Shadowrun. And this is the thing, is that you have to have a group. Well, that's not as hard as you think it is. You have to have a storyteller, or DM or GM. That's a significant problem to have. And then you have to have a story or a campaign around which to play. And so I've kind of come to the realization that for many of these games, if I want to play them, I have to run them. I have to. Now, I'm running multiple D&D sessions. I've been running as a game master in D&D and in Star Wars, the role-playing game, and other things for probably going on 15 years or more, probably more. But I now will call a Kalakatulu game. Okay, I'm running it. Simple. I just need to say I'm running it. This is what I'm running. If I want to run a Shadowrun 3rd edition game, I got to find people that are willing to play 3rd edition and not play 5th or 6th. Top Secret. I've got a couple of modules for Top Secret because they were kickstarted, so I have something there that I can play. I just have to read the rules and better understand the game. But it all comes down to the fact that if I go out there and I put myself out as a storyteller, or as a GM, or as the guy, then I don't think I have any problem finding players. I actually think if I do that, I'd have a clamoring of people wanting to play. It's just that I have to have the investment to say, okay, I'm going to create the concept of the original story. I'm going to make certain I'm able to run the story. I'm going to make certain I understand the rules. I'm going to make certain that when we do play, I'm prepared, and that when we're done, I do whatever post-prep I need to do as well. I don't have the luxury of just saying, oh, I want to play this game and sitting down somewhere and doing it. And I had hoped this year, had Corona not been a thing, I was going to be going to Gen Con for the first time. A lot of what I was going to be doing at Gen Con was sitting down at tables and playing games that I've never played. One, to get exposed to them. B, to be exposed to with someone who actually knows what they're doing. And C, to maybe learn the rules and to better understand how I can run the game myself. That was my plan. Now, I'm going to virtual Gen Con. Woohoo! But, and I'll probably go to Gen Con next year if it runs. But I realize that I kind of have to step up and say, yep, I'm the guy running the game, and therefore that's how I get to play the game. It may not be as ideal as sitting and playing a character, but I'm running the game, and I'm still getting to play it. And maybe, just maybe, one of those people who I get to sit around the virtual table with me will step up and say, yeah, I want to run a game now. And then maybe that'll happen, because my intent is this will be a virtual thing. I don't expect to be able to get people at the table, especially now with Corona, to be able to play this, but with Zoom and Discord and Skype, you can, and Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds and whatever other tools. It's so much easier to play an online game now than it's ever been in the past, and I think the adoption rate of doing it, especially for me, I prefer sitting around with a bunch of friends and being social in that sense, but I understand that that doesn't happen, and that if I want to play certain things, I'm going to have to do it virtually. So that is my world, that is my thought. I want to basically put this out there and say, okay, guys, let's try this game, and play it and whatever. And when I, as far as like Mechwarrior, the Destiny game goes, you can do a little bit of both. You can actually probably run with Tabletop Simulator the battles, and then run the role playing using Roll20, and you get the best of both worlds. You can kind of do it. Actually, one of the guys that I play online with right now, the campaign we're currently playing online, he's decided even if we get to go back tabletop, he still wants to run it online because he finds that certain aspects of the game work better for him in that sense, and he doesn't want to try to, mostly the mapping and the tokening, he doesn't want to have to try to go back to a physical world, and maybe that's what it is. So, anyways, that's my take on games that I really want to play, or have played and want to play more of. Thank you, and if you have any questions or comments or want to tell me I'm just a fool, you can reach out to me at ratnef@gmail.com, ratemes@gmail.com, and until next time, take care.